Okay. They got this going. They got a whole reel going. We gonna get to Sophie Cunningham and what she had to say after this. This is from the WNBPA on Instagram. What it will look like to pay WNBA players what they deserve. The 2025 WNBA season has set records for attendance.
That was Sophie Cunningham, a guard for the Phoenix Mercury, openly confirming what league insiders have been quietly warning about for weeks. The WNBA is not drifting toward a lockout. It is moving directly toward one. Not hypothetically, not as a negotiating scare tactic, but as an increasingly unavoidable outcome. When a player with Sophie Cunningham's visibility and credibility chooses to address collective bargaining negotiations on her own podcast and repeatedly calls the process so dumb within a span of 30 seconds, it's a clear signal that internal communication has completely broken down. This isn't a rookie venting frustration or an anonymous source leaking tension. Cunningham is a veteran player with league-wide respect, media experience, and a growing public platform. Players like her don't casually escalate situations unless they believe private channels are no longer working. Going public is rarely the first move in labor disputes. It's the last resort when trust has eroded and progress has stalled. What makes this moment especially telling is the tone. Cunningham wasn't speaking in coded language or delivering carefully rehearsed talking points. She sounded exasperated, almost incredulous that negotiations had reached such a dysfunctional state. That kind of candor suggests the players themselves no longer believe meaningful progress is happening behind closed doors. Historically, when labor talks reach this stage, the damage is already done. Once players begin openly criticizing the process rather than the outcomes, it indicates a fundamental lack of confidence in leadership on both sides. It also signals that the union is preparing its members and the public for a worst-case scenario. The word lockout carries weight because it affects far more than contracts. It impacts player development, fan engagement, media partnerships, and league momentum. For a league that has spent the last 2 seasons finally capturing mainstream attention, even the possibility of a lockout represents a massive step backward. Cunningham's comments matter not because they are dramatic, but because they are revealing. They show that frustration is no longer contained internally. It has spilled into public discourse, where it becomes harder to control narratives and expectations. And once that happens, resolution becomes significantly more difficult. This wasn't just a podcast moment. It was a warning flare.
Man, I'm telling y'all, every day it seems like it's more and more cooked, man. It seems like things is just cooked. You know what I mean? WNBPA crashing out still. We watched them crash out with that letter they sent out calling out the WNBA, talking about they letting the clock run out and all this stuff. They're still taking shots at the WNBA on Instagram. How ghetto is that? Like, what are y'all doing?
Publicly, the WNBA Players Association is carefully curating its narrative. They highlight expansion success stories like the Golden State Valkyries, generating $20 million in revenue before playing a single game. They emphasize $250 million expansion fees. They celebrate record attendance numbers and sold-out arenas. Every one of those facts is accurate. But what's missing is just as important as what's included. The union rarely mentions operating costs, infrastructure investments, or the reality that most teams still operate at a loss, even during this so-called record-breaking season. Expansion fees don't translate directly into operational revenue. Attendance growth doesn't automatically offset travel costs, marketing expenses, player salaries, and facility investments. One statistic in particular is conspicuously absent from their messaging. When Caitlin Clark was injured, WNBA viewership dropped by 55%. That's not a marginal decline. That's a collapse. That number exposes a reality the Players Association seems unwilling to confront. The league's recent surge in popularity is heavily concentrated around a single player. That doesn't invalidate the contributions of others, but it does change the leverage calculation dramatically. If growth is disproportionately tied to one individual, then the bargaining power of the collective is more fragile than advertised. The moment that individual is absent, momentum stalls. That's not a sustainable foundation for aggressive financial demands. The uncomfortable truth is that the league's current success is narrower than its public narrative suggests. Ignoring that reality doesn't make it disappear. It just increases the risk of miscalculation.
Instagram. Let me check my DM. Let's go over to Instagram, the WNBPA. Y'all are crazy, bro. Y'all actually crazy for this. Why are y'all all over Instagram right now? Look at what they are doing. Look at, okay, let's pause it here. Okay, they got this going. They got a whole reel going. We gonna get to Sophie Cunningham and what she had to say after this. This is from the WNBPA.
Publicly, the WNBA Players Association is carefully curating its narrative. They highlight expansion success stories like the Golden State Valkyries, generating $20 million in revenue before playing a single game. They emphasize $250 million expansion fees. They celebrate record attendance numbers and sold-out arenas. Every one of those facts is accurate. But what's missing is just as important as what's included. The union rarely mentions operating costs, infrastructure investments, or the reality that most teams still operate at a loss. Even during this so-called record-breaking season, expansion fees don't translate directly into operational revenue. Attendance growth doesn't automatically offset travel costs, marketing expenses, player salaries, and facility investments. One statistic in particular is conspicuously absent from their messaging. When Caitlin Clark was injured, WNBA viewership dropped by 55%. That's not a marginal decline. That's a collapse. That number exposes a reality the Players Association seems unwilling to confront. The league's recent surge in popularity is heavily concentrated around a single player. That doesn't invalidate the contributions of others, but it does change the leverage calculation dramatically. If growth is disproportionately tied to one individual, then the bargaining power of the collective is more fragile than advertised. The moment that individual is absent, momentum stalls. That's not a sustainable foundation for aggressive financial demands. The uncomfortable truth is that the league's current success is narrower than its public narrative suggests. Ignoring that reality doesn't make it disappear. It just increases the risk of miscalculation.
Expansion. Okay, so they're basically saying, okay, Joe's high. All of these teams coming in, spending $250 million, yada, yada, yada. The numbers. Okay. It says the NBA itself owns 42% of the WNBA, with many of its owners separating teams in both league, and the NBA has a long history of claiming it does. The NBA has a long history of claiming it doesn't make any money when it's convenient. Oh, so now y'all taking shots at the NBA. Now y'all taking shots at the NBA. Okay, now this is what we got to get to, man.
To fully grasp the stakes of this dispute, it's essential to look past the WNBA Players Association social media graphics and examine what they're actually demanding. On the surface, their core request sounds straightforward, a 50% revenue sharing model similar to what NBA players receive. To casual observers, that seems reasonable, even fair. But the critical details are buried beneath the slogans. According to multiple leak sources, WNBA owners have stated that agreeing to the current player demands would result in approximately $700 million in losses. That figure isn't speculative. It's not a scare tactic floated anonymously for leverage. Several owners have gone on record stating that the proposed financial model is fundamentally unsustainable given current revenue streams. This is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable. Revenue sharing only works when there is sufficient revenue to share. The NBA generates billions annually through media rights, sponsorships, and global merchandising. The WNBA, despite recent growth, operates on a vastly smaller financial scale. Owners argue that a 50% revenue split under current conditions would require massive operating subsidies year after year. That's not a temporary hit. It's a long-term structural deficit. And no business, regardless of ideology, can operate indefinitely under those conditions. The players' public messaging avoids these numbers entirely. Instead, it frames the issue as a matter of fairness rather than feasibility. That distinction matters. A fair system that collapses financially benefits no one. There's also a strategic problem here. By anchoring their demands to NBA comparisons, the players invite scrutiny they may not want. The NBA's revenue model is built on decades of global expansion, massive television contracts, and a deeply entrenched fan base. The WNBA is still in a growth phase. Treating those two realities as equivalent ignores economic fundamentals. This doesn't mean players don't deserve improvements. It means those improvements must align with what the league can actually support. Negotiations break down when one side treats aspiration as entitlement rather than a goal tied to measurable growth. Right now, that disconnect is at the heart of the conflict.
No.
Like just nothing.
Honestly, nothing. We get like weekly emails from the PA side of things, and it's just so dumb.
Yeah.
Dumb. Okay, but
it's over, bro. It's over. Sophie Cunningham just confirmed it's about to be a lockout, y'all. Sophie Cunningham confirmed it's about to be a lockout. It's over. It's a wrap. It's a wrap. It's a wrap, y'all. The owners aren't budging. And I told y'all the owners were not going.
The warning signs are no longer subtle. What once sounded like speculation is now hardened into something far more serious. The WNBA is on a direct path toward a lockout. This reality became impossible to ignore when Phoenix Mercury guard Sophie Cunningham openly criticized the collective bargaining agreement negotiations on her own podcast. She didn't hedge her words or hide behind vague language. She called the process so dumb repeatedly, and coming from a veteran player with media experience and league-wide credibility, that kind of public frustration signals a complete breakdown in trust. Players don't go public like that unless internal conversations have stalled entirely. Behind the scenes, the situation has grown even more chaotic. The WNBA Players Association has effectively shifted away from traditional labor negotiations and moved into public pressure mode. Instead of closed-door bargaining, they've turned to Instagram campaigns, polished infographics about revenue sharing, online petitions, and even physical protests like inflatable rats outside NBA offices in New York. These are not the actions of a union confident in its leverage. They are signs of desperation masked as activism. Meanwhile, the league's owners have responded with calculated silence. No counterestatements. No public engagement. No visible urgency. That silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. At the core of the dispute is the players' demand for a 50% revenue-sharing model similar to the NBA's. On the surface, that sounds reasonable. But according to multiple team owners, agreeing to the current proposal would result in an estimated $700 million in losses. That figure isn't rhetorical exaggeration. Owners have gone on record saying the financial model being proposed simply does not work given the league's actual revenue. The Players Association avoids addressing this directly, instead framing the debate as a moral issue of fairness rather than an economic issue of sustainability. Publicly, the union highlights selective success stories. Expansion teams generating millions before playing a game, $250 million expansion fees, record attendance figures, and sold-out arenas. All of that is technically true. What's missing from the narrative are operating cost, infrastructure investments, and the fact that most teams still operate at a loss, even during this historic period. Most notably absent is one uncomfortable statistic. When Caitlin Clark was injured, WNBA viewership dropped by 55%. That isn't a small decline. It exposes how narrowly concentrated the league's recent growth actually is. This is where the owners hold the advantage. The current CBA expires in October, with training camps starting in April. That gives both sides time, but time favors ownership. These owners are billionaires with diversified income streams. The WNBA is not their primary business. They can afford to wait. They can even afford to lose a season. Players cannot. Careers are short, income windows are limited, and missed seasons can't be recovered. In labor negotiations, leverage isn't about who makes the most noise. It's about who can endure the longest. Right now, that reality is working against the Players Association, and unless something changes, a lockout is no longer a possibility. It's the most likely outcome.